Previous all-school days have taken up questions like affirmative action and gay and lesbian rights. This year, as Dean Short said, we'll be talking about women and violence in a diverse community. I'd like at this point to introduce our keynote speaker. I'm going to tell you some formal things about her, but before I do that, I think you should all know that in every time somebody mentioned Connie Rice's name, the response to that is, isn't she wonderful? It doesn't matter who you talk to. That's what people say. Isn't she wonderful? So I think we have a special experience, and we're very grateful to have her with us today. She is a civil rights activist and lawyer. She founded the Advancement Project, which was kind of a policy action tank rather than a think tank that was committed to and is committed to racial justice. She's now received at this point more than 50 awards for advancing multiracial democracy. And that included the 2001 Peace Prize from the California Wellness Foundation and an award from the Ford Humanitarian Award in Los Angeles County. She's co-litigated many civil rights cases, and she has successfully brought more than $1.6 billion in awards and remedies as a result of her activity with the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund. She's been named one of California's top 10 most influential lawyers. In 2006, Los Angeles Times West magazine named her one of the 100 most powerful people in Southern California. And the Pasadena Weekly placed her first in their listing of most powerful women. Well, this is really interesting. She's the second cousin to former U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. And that's important too. So with that, I'd like to introduce Connie Rice.
Dean Flynn, thank you so much. Can you hear me? Good morning. If this ends up on YouTube, I will, no, I will not sue. I'm just going to give a disclaimer. I caught the flu over the weekend, and so I am high on Sudafed. When Dr. Short asked me to do this, it didn't even matter what it was. Whatever Terry Short asked me to do, I do. I just admire her so much. Thank you, Terry, for doing everything that you do for these young women and men. And I've just never known anybody to be so internationally focused and yet can sum up the California mass incarceration strategy, and I'm just so glad I found you, because this is a bad sign, Terry, because you're going to end up being pulled into some of my schemes now, and I will get Dr. Short in trouble, as I get most people in trouble. And Dr. Flynn, I don't know to whom you've been speaking. That is the first time I've heard she's wonderful, because I could give you a whole list of people who would violently disagree and who are probably meeting together right now to figure out how to pull the plug on what they see as a vector of problems in LA County. It is wonderful to be here with you. Look at this crowd of young women and men. Okay? Dr. Murray, Reverend Chip Murray, I've been on a journey with him. He's been the Dean of Civil Rights in this county for a very, very long time. He and John Mack, and I've been the prodigal daughter that has run off the plantation many a time, as Dr. Murray will tell you. But he always welcomes me back, and I do love you, Dr. Murray. I'm going to share with you, yes, please, please. He's been a servant to this county for a long time. I'm going to not do statistics. I'm going to do stories this morning, because I think that this gathering is very, very important, and it brings me back to my roots in a lot of ways, because I've been on a very strange journey for the last 20 years. I've been with some of the most violent men you can imagine. My jihad for now is against the most vociferous violence, the violence that is in our underclass communities, the violence that we shelter ourselves from and that we are quite safe from if you live in middle-class communities. And I did so because I was trying to help women. And here's where my disclosures come. I'm an attorney and I have to give full disclosures. I am an unabashed and very dangerous feminist. Okay? And Reverend Murray will tell you I say this in all male enclaves as well. I don't just say this to female enclaves. I am the Black Murphy Brown. Okay? And most of you probably weren't born when Murphy Brown was on television. I am just now mastering email, so I am totally ready to leave the stage and hand it to you young people who are technologically savvy and so forth. I belong in the Smithsonian. But you laughed, you recognize Murphy Brown. Well, I am, and I am not the normal woman, so you can't take what I do not live a normal woman's life. I am a loner. I am like my cousin. We are both loners. It's the Rice gene. It is in our genome. We are very strange, and we claim it, and we don't make any apologies for it. I do not have children. My child has whiskers and a tail. They burned women like me about 400 years ago. I do not live a normal lifestyle and don't want one, okay? And when people ask me about how do you balance, I don't. I have no desire to balance my life. My life is about my work, okay? I didn't want children. I didn't want a husband. Okay? That is not normal, all right? I am maladjusted in the traditional civil rights way. So I do not expect most women to live my life, right? But it is mine and I'm very happy with it. You need to take that as a caveat. I grew up in a family of men, and this is what warped me. The men in my family are, we just did, you know, my mother and I ruled the roost. So the men in my family, my brothers are both doctors. One is on Harvard's medical faculty. He's an ER doc and has 100 IQ points on me, and I just adore him. We were like scorpions in a bottle, and he was the perfect trainer for, you know, male dominance and so forth, because we still, to this day, I was on the phone with him last night, still continuing our 50-year battle, and I adore him. If he ever left the earth, I wouldn't know what to do. So I grew up with brothers who had to do the dishes. I grew up with brothers who don't understand exerting male dominance through violence. My father is a spy and a military maven. He speaks 5 languages, and when we got our PhDs and JDs, he decided he had set the bar too low, so he went back and got a second PhD. My mother is more brilliant than all of us put together, and you know, stayed home to raise us because she realized that infants, you actually shape their neurobiology when you stay with them, and that's partially why I did not want to have children, because I knew that I couldn't do my work and give my children everything that I would want, as she did. But my mother is absolutely brilliant. She can teach Chaucer to children with Down syndrome, and I'm not exaggerating. She's a master teacher. And when she applied to go to medical school, she was told that she would take the place of African American males, and so no women could go to Howard's medical school. And so she could have run this country if she wanted to, But in her day, we benefited from sex discrimination because the women in our schools were the women who now run the world. Because they could only do 4 things. They could work in insane asylums and be nurses. They could be teachers. They could be secretaries. And they could be maids. And my mother chose to be a teacher, as so many women did. So we were the direct beneficiaries of sexism because the women who taught us were in our schools, and they could have been provosts and deans, and just like Dr. Terry Short and Dean Flynn and all of the wonderful women, my cousin, and all the wonderful women that you see now in the world. But with those caveats, I think what I want to do is I want to give you a frame of analysis here. I grew up not understanding the real world. I grew up in a bubble. We were an Air Force family. And the men in my family did not behave like the men I discovered out in the real world when they let me out. And the real world for me was first Harvard, which is another bubble. So I went from Air Force bases, which is one bubble. You see very little male misbehavior because it's martial law. It is a very serious constraint on what most women face. Are there abuses? Yes, but they are come down on very hard. So that was a very protected bubble. And if you met my father, you would know why I did not date. He would put on his full colonel's uniform, and any man that I brought to that, I just gave up. And I found out one day when I was leaving the house, I forgot something and came back in, and I heard him on the phone, and he was instructing the military police, it is 0400 hours, she has left base. She is on her 10 speed, and she is heading for the teen center. I want 2 units deployed. I had military police escorts. What could I do? I gave up. There was just no winning with him. There was no one going to get within 10 feet of me on a base or anywhere else. And so when I got to college, I just hadn't had enough interaction with males, and I just didn't understand. And my mother had to tell me a couple times. She said, Connie, you really can't let them know how smart you are. I said, why not? I still don't get it. I'm 53 and still don't get it. Reverend Murray will tell you. I'm clueless on this stuff. And my law partner now forbids me to talk to young women in our office because I just ruin them. But there's a reason for this. I just didn't get it, and I still don't. I didn't understand why. I said, why? She said, well, darling, it's just, they can get easily threatened. I said, why? She said, just trust me on this. Just you don't need to show them. I said, I'm not trying to show anything. I said, just wait. I said, she says, don't question them directly. It gets threatening. I said, okay, can I question them indirectly? She says, cross-examination is not a good way to have romantic relationships. I still don't get it. But needless to say, I was clueless. All right? And I got to the campus, and long story short, I just didn't understand the threat that we posed. That for men, the threat is humiliation. The threat is embarrassment, which leads to feelings of emasculation. For women, the threat is violence and death. And that the dynamic between us is one that is very, very strange. It is a very strange codependency. And we need to understand that codependency. And we don't need a frame of blame. We need a frame of understanding so that we can help each other create a healthy community. That is not always where I was. When I got to college, because I was clueless and didn't understand that men want sex and that we're the source of that sex, I really was clueless. And so when I got to college, and remember I hadn't dated, and so this guy decided that, oh, she's going to be mine. And they had actually rated us on a scale of 1 to 10. They'd gone through the Facebook, and these are the guys who had the incoming freshmen. They were the sophomore males. And they had done like a beauty, it was like a meat market kind of thing. I didn't know. We would walk into the freshman union in Harvard Yard, and they would hold up cards. I still didn't get it. They were rating us. And so this one young man decided that, oh, I'm going to get her. And I, with my thick bottle glasses and my frizzy hair, I really was a very strange creature. For some reason, he decided he was going to give me. A long story short, he ended up trying to walk me to my classes. And I said, well, you know, I really can read a map. I don't really need you to escort me. And so I just wasn't. And then he would come and sit at the table in the cafeteria. And I would ask him, what are you doing here? And he would say, well, you know, do you want to? He was trying to be nice. I just wasn't picking up on the cues, and to this day, I don't pick up on the cues. But then I really didn't. And my law partner will now tell me, Connie, did you notice that man walking into that glass wall looking at you? I said, no, where was he? You know, I just totally over my head. He asked me to meet him in the kitchen at the end of the hallway. It was a co-ed dorm. And I thought he needed help with his homework or something. And so I went in there, and he just decided that I was the kind of woman that you had to kind of hit over the, you know, the Flintstones, they hit you over the head and kind of drag the caveman. And he said something to me, and I said, I don't think you understand. I'm not interested in you, and I think you have a complex about being short. You are not secure enough. I don't think you're secure enough for me to have a relationship with. And let me know when you get better self-esteem, and maybe we can go out. What was I thinking? You know, and believe me, if you've seen some of the men I've dated men who were, it's not about being short. I'm almost married a man, Chu Keng Chuan, who was like 5'1". I was 6 inches taller than him. I almost went to Singapore and married. So it wasn't about it. It was about the fact that he was insecure about who he was as a man, and I just told him he didn't have enough self-esteem, because I'm super self-secure, and I have to have a man who, and you know, unfortunately I'm not lesbian, and you know, if I'm going to deal with men, they have to be very secure. And so I didn't understand that you couldn't say that to a man. And he snapped. And he broke my ribs. And he broke my nose. And when I was in the hospital recovering, I wasn't angry with him. I was angry with myself, because I hadn't fought back. And that was the first time I looked at myself and realized we'd been socialized to be passive. We'd been socialized not to claim our physical power. Women are very restrained physically. We don't take up the same room. We get in an airplane and we scrunch ourselves into small space. So there's a psychology of denial, of exertion of our dominance over our physical space, and a psychology that says that we must retreat and cede. And it's not that we want to, you know, be domineering and obnoxious, although I did end up going that route too. It's that there's a psychology of the giving and giving and giving. It's also why we blame ourselves. We will internalize our isms. We will internalize and blame ourselves. You very rarely hear of women taking out their families and themselves. Now, that doesn't make us better, it just makes us different. It means we need to understand how both genders deal with the dominance or trauma of violence. And men and women on a curve, you can kind of talk generally, because obviously individuals vary enormously. But in general, women internalize violence, and we will blame ourselves. And luckily I wasn't there, but my question was, why didn't I hit him back? He wasn't that big. And I was just fascinated with my lack of reaction. And that began my journey of claiming not just my brain power and my psychological power, but I wanted to claim my physical power, because I realized until I had control over my physical space, especially given the work I wanted to do, and that I was going to continue to piss men off, I had better be able to defend myself physically. And if I was going to go into prisons and death rows, which is where I knew I was headed, I had better be able to defend myself physically. And that took first a psychological change. And so I signed up for Taekwondo, martial arts, because he didn't have a weapon. He just had his body. And I should have been able to fight him. But it wasn't physical, it was psychological. The reason I didn't hit him back and fight him off was psychological. So I started the journey of understanding violence in women from my own personal experience and my own antidote to it. And what I found in Taekwondo, which was an all-male, was Suk Yum Chung, and he didn't believe in teaching women. So I learned from Young Hoon Kwok, who was his top black belt student at MIT. So I'd go to MIT and I would learn under Hoon. And it was all male. And I just happened to be built to a T to do Taekwondo. Long torso, very, very strong legs. We got that from slavery. Very, very strong legs. Powerful legs. And my hands are fast as lightning, and I'm fearless. So here I am. I used to be 5'5½". I'm shrinking. As you get older, you shrink. I'm 5'5½". Not almost 5'6". I'm 5'5" now, and shrinking. And it's dangerous because I think I'm 6 feet. I have an internal height of 6 feet, as my psychologist once told me. My problem is that I think I'm 6'1". And I'm 5'5", and it's a very bad problem. I'd rather have that problem than being 6 feet and thinking I'm 5 foot. But in Taekwondo, I completely escaped the fetters of femaleness. I already had a very powerful intellectual vision of myself, but in Taekwondo, I said I can not only outthink them and outdebate them, I can also kick their asses. Now, that was where I was at age 22. It was a combative, hostile posture because I was recovering from the trauma of male violence. It was not a mature vision, okay? What I had to learn was that my mother was trying to get me to understand that the first culture I had to become fluent in was not the cultures of women, but the cultures of men. We needed to understand what provokes the fear and the control. And once we did that, you, instead of building a hostile relationship that is based on combat, you can begin to build a healthy community, because even a rabid feminist like myself understands. Even women who want to live in a community of women alone. If you take the men out of a community, that community dies. Okay? And even though I live in a world of women, and my law firm has to do affirmative action for men because it is an all-female power base, and we have to make sure that the men are treated right and that they're treated fairly, and that the inherent bias toward femaleness, which we have. It's not a question of whether you are biased. It's a question of what bias you have and how you cope with it. And mine, I am a female chauvinist. I am quite clear that there is a superior gender and that I am a member of it. And I had to understand racism in the same way. There's a whole range of it, and it's based in fears, and I need to understand what those fears are and what they're based in and how virulent you are. Are you on the grand wizard end of it, or are you more like my grandfather who hated white people and kept a loaded shotgun over the door, and if anybody white came to the, this is not on the right side, this is the barn side, they like guns. They hunt. All 5 of the girls were taught to hunt, so my mother knows how to shoot. But he was very badly treated in South Carolina by white men, and his father was a white man. And it wasn't until he was 70-something years old that he decided that white people were okay to come into his house. That is racism. You can understand why, but it is racism. And I had to get him to claim it. So it's not about which phobia or ism you have. It's about understanding that all of us have them and then claiming it and then compensating for it. Mine is female chauvinism. I don't hate men at all. I love men. But I'm a female chauvinist. I just think that women are smarter. And on that IAT test, take that IAT test, the implicit associations test, You don't have time to cover up your biases with political correctness. You have to do the associations like this, and it's measured in milliseconds. And guess what? I don't test for race. Most people do, because we are racially segregated and you know, our history. And we haven't quite figured out what to do with all these different kinds of people yet. We're getting there, but we're not quite there yet. I don't test for racism because my family is so multiracial, and we were so used to being tokens. Tokens don't usually test because they've compensated for the dominant culture. And if you're at Howard, the dominant culture is light, bright, damn near white, black people like me. So it depends on the context which culture is dominant. I think you understand that. But in this context, I test off the scales. I automatically associate, there's an implicit association of better, smarter, wiser to anything that I could denote female. If you have an implicit association, like most people are wired to think of the dominant racial as European, then there are automatic associations of goodness with things that are described as white. If you go to Ghana, it's inversed. It's inverse. The purity argument, you go to Japan, is something completely different. So it's the implicit association test that tests you in your cultural milieu. And I am a female chauvinist. Given that, when I say, what did it take for me to learn? When I went to Athens, Ohio, we almost got women killed because I had not learned that lesson. We went to Athens, Ohio to help the coal miner families, and we thought that we were going to set up a battered women's shelter outside of the hollers near the universities, Kentucky and Ohio, and they're right there where the university is, and the coal mining towns. And some of the poorest people in this country are poor, rural white people. And they are totally isolated. And we were trying to help the women. When you get deprivation, human deprivation at that level, what you end up seeing is a lot of incest, a lot of abuse of the women, and you realize that for the men, it's all they have control over. I didn't understand this. And so if you come in as outsiders and you try to help their women, they see you as taking the only thing that they actually have control and dominance over that makes them men. You are actually taking the one thing in their lives that made them feel powerful as men. And you were interfering with that. We didn't understand that. We thought we were helping women. They burned the shelter down the first time. Burned it to the ground. We rebuilt it. And when they burned it the second time, a woman almost died. And stupid me, I had to step back and say, we're doing this wrong. We're doing this wrong. We have to understand what's going on here because we are endangering the very women we're trying to help. And that's when I began this very strange journey. And I began trying to understand what it was that was such a threat. Because until you neutralize that threat, what it said was you had to take care of the men and the women. Okay? Here in LA, we had a husband of one of my secretaries come in with a gun. He was going to kill her, and he was threatening to go to the school to kill all of his children. And luckily by then we had the bulletproof glass up, but we had to get her and her children to a shelter. There wasn't a single bed in LA for her and her children. And she had a 14-year-old son, which meant she wasn't going to leave her 14-year-old son, but the shelters won't allow a 14-year-old male. And I said to myself, what is a city so rich that it is fourth behind Calcutta in terms of its income dispersion? We have no women's shelters. We just spent $40 million on an elephant enclosure, but we have no women's shelters. We spent $19 million on a gorilla enclosure, but we have no women's shelters. And worse, we have nothing to help the men get over the fact that they think that they've got to exert their control over their families through violence. We have no male shelters. When I went down to Watts right after the riots, we were meeting in Fame when Reverend Murray was head of that wonderful church. And stupid me, I decided that I'd been at LDF for a year and I hadn't been to the black housing projects or any housing projects, and I thought, you know, the city just exploded in the biggest riot in the country and I needed to go down to the black housing project. So I left from court one day. You know, I'm still clueless, folks. Don't ever follow my example. You'll end up dead. I'm going to win a Darwin Award one day. I was in federal court, and I was before a very conservative judge, which meant I was in my St. John's suit, my Ferragamos, and more pearls than Barbara Bush. I can look like my cousin when I have to. It's a lesson I learned from Queen Elizabeth I, my first shero, the first woman to exercise worldwide power when women were owned and a little above chattel. And of course, Queen Elizabeth ruled through the projection of the Virgin Queen image, and her clothes were everything. And I'm afraid that about 75% of how women are evaluated is how we look on the first impression. Just understand that. Don't fight it. Just understand it and work with it. So when I'm before a conservative male judge, I find that when I look like their wives, I have a better outcome for my clients. So I do it. I do it. And I actually have fun doing it. My closet is, I'm actually a Neiman Marxist, and I've got so many clothes that could, you know, Imelda has nothing on me. I had to build a room for my shoes and my boots, and they're categorized by theme and by strategy. I strategically dress. All right. Yeah, this is going to end up on YouTube, and I wonder why. I wonder why I'm completely unconfirmable for anything. So here I am in this Republican get-up, and I just decide to leave. I leave federal court, and I go down to Jordan Downs Housing Project in this ridiculous get-up with pearl earrings and my hair on top of my head, and there's a lot of hair, so it goes way up. I left my dented Honda on Grape Street. And, of course, that's where the Grape Street Crips own. They actually own the housing project. I didn't know any of this. And I go into the gym, and there's this group of women, and I thought, I'm going to help the women. And there's this group of women who live in that housing project, and I go up to them, and I said, I walk in this ridiculous get-up, and they're in tears, and they're crying, and I don't know why. And I said, excuse me, I'm Connie Rice, and I'm a lawyer with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and I'd like to know if there's anything I can do. You know, the city is just, the fires are still burning, and I just wanted to make sure that you all could get the stuff that you need to survive this riot. And Mrs. Tolliver stood up, and she looked at me, and they were in 2 rows of chairs, kind of like this row here, and there were about 40 of them. And I didn't even know what they were meeting about. And Mrs. Tolliver stood up, and she said, "You light white, damn near white bitch. Where were you when we had to put our children to bed in a bathtub because the bullets are flying through here like it's a war zone? Where were you when my son was gunned down by LAPD and he wasn't doing anything? Where were you when gang rape was an initiation rite for the blood bounty hunter bloods, and all of our daughters were gang raped? Where were you?" And because she was a prospective client, I said, "Yes, ma'am, you're absolutely right. Where was I?" These women were in the middle of a crack war. We later determined that the risk of death by a stranger during those 3 years, at the end of the 80s and through 92, was 1 in 250. You had a 1 in 250 chance of being murdered. It is 1 in 5 million in my neighborhood. That's Khmer Rouge, Cambodia level violence. And we had left these women in that kind of environment. 10 miles south of here, not even 7 miles south of here, 10 miles south of downtown. We don't need to go to Darfur. We have it here. And we leave those women in those circumstances. The men in that community have a hyper-masculine response to absolute emasculation. There are no jobs. It is 75% unemployment, and we're worried about 10% unemployment for the middle class. They haven't had work in 5 generations. They are linguistically isolated. They are economically isolated. Go to the Milken Institute and interview their forecast people. Interview Jack Kaiser of the UCLA forecast. Interview your economists here at USC. They will tell you the underclass and the rural underclass are not in their economic forecasts. They are in the prison bed forecasts. They are not in the stimulus package. They are not in the bailout. They are not in the script. The women who are left in these underclass communities are cussing out women like me because for we feminists, we decided that their plight was okay, and we decided that we could have them as our nannies so that we could go do our careers. Okay? That is why we don't have a diverse feminist movement, because women in my economic class betrayed the women at the bottom. We need to understand what these women face, and we need to understand that those men aren't just a threat to them. They are a threat to the entire ecosystem we live in. Because if you think that we can contain them in our super maximum security prisons, if you think that we can have a 60% incarceration rate, and leave these women with no male infrastructure whatsoever. We have destroyed these families with our war on drugs and our war on gangs. And we, as middle-class people, needed to feel safe, and so those are the policies that actually entrap them and create sand traps and quicksand pits for people in underclass communities. We do the same thing to the hollers in coal mining towns. No economy, no infrastructure, no ladder to get out from the bottom of the well. We leave them with schools that our friends are now running, and those schools couldn't teach the sculptured poodles in Beverly Hills how to bark, and there's no way out or up, and there are no women's shelters. We can't just look at this vis-a-vis women. We have got to be fluent, not just in the different cultures, because what you do for Vietnamese women, I wouldn't have a clue. You've got to get into that culture by class, by immigration status, by language, by outlook. You have to be culturally fluent, or you will make the same mistake that I made in Appalachia. I almost got those women killed. But you can also get the women in your own backyard killed by not understanding the role that we play in their ecosystem. These women stand vulnerable not just to the men who beat them and abuse them and threaten them with violence, because they have to maintain control over them. It is the only way that they can feel like they're men. We need to understand that image of masculinity and why it's so frail. And we need to make sure that the ecosystem changes, not just for the women and the children, but for the men as well. Let me tell you a story of this very strange journey. When these women told me, when I said, yes, ma'am, I said, I can help you or I can leave. It's up to you. Do you want to know what they told me? They said, the only way that you can help us is to help our men. I said, where are they? They said, they're in a bunker, a portable trailer outside of Markham Middle School. I said, well, show me where they are. Stupid again. Went to the trailer, knocked on the door. Remember how I'm dressed, St. John's suit, pearls, you know, the whole. This door opens, and this guy in a wife-beater undershirt, pants down below his butt, a red bandana tied around his head, gold chains, you know, buffed up muscles, tattoos, you know, from the red bandana. I can't remember if it was red or blue. It was red, it was Bloods. If it was blue, it was Crips. Still didn't know that. He said, what you want? I said, I'm Connie Rice, and I'm a lawyer. I want to know if I can help you. You know, I just never learned. I knew better than to go into the trailer. He looked at me like I was E.T., slammed the door. I stood there, I could hear them talking inside, and then he flung the door wide open 3 minutes later. And here I am, the door's here, I'm down here, there's some steps, and so the door flings open, and it was a sea of gangsters with red and blue bandanas. It looked like a UN convention with all the flags wrapped around their heads and their biceps, tattoos galore. I'm looking at them thinking, oh, holy, holy, what is this? I knew not to go into the trailer. That much I knew. And so Mr. Wife-beater undershirt came out, and he said, tell him what you told me. I said, hi, I'm Connie Rice. I'm an attorney, and I'm here to help you. harder faces you could not have imagined. They were not happy to see me. And one barrel-chested, bald-headed guy with a serpent tattooed on his head leaned over and said, "You a lawyer?" I said, "Yeah." He said, Can you get us something?" I said, "Depends on what it is." He said, "Can you get us that agreement between the Arabs and the Jews?" I said, "Would you be referring to the Egyptian Sinai Peace Accords?" He said, "Yeah, that one." I said, "Yes, I can get you that treaty." He said, "Yeah." Another guy piped up, "Yeah, if the Arabs and the Jews can stop killing each other, we can too." So I took out a notepad and I said, "Is there anything else?" They said, "Yeah." I started taking notes. I left. I came back with the Egyptian Sinai Peace Accords next day. I just still wasn't going in the trailer. They were hammering out the Watts gang truce, the last aspects of it. And they modeled it on the Sinai Accords. And that began my journey with some of the most violent men in this country. And I had to make a lot of compromises. And at the very beginning, my feminist friends were saying, "Connie, what are you doing running around with these misogynists who hate women and beat their women and rape their women and just, you know, how can you run around with them?" I said, "Because I'm gambling. I'm taking a gamble that if I help them fight their annihilation, they will eventually evolve up to the issues that I care about." Their condition for having me help them was that they could not abuse the women in their lives. They had to claim their children. It's the same thing Jim Brown does. As many problems as he has modeled it, and he does pay a penance for when he goes off the reservation too. But here's what I learned, and I will end with a very uplifting story. The end of the story is very uplifting. I had to learn to talk to these men. They called me Lady Lawyer, which is an honorific in that world, believe me. Lady Lawyer. And I stuck with them. I didn't judge them. I did have standards for their behavior. But I fought to find them jobs if they would get out of that murderous lifestyle. I fought to keep that gang truce going. I struggled to understand their mindset and what they needed to go from a Cro-Magnon level of manhood through from Australopithecus to Cro-Magnon to actual Homo sapiens. It was a journey. And I mean, I'm writing a book about it. It's a movie. 12 years later, because I never proselytized in terms of feminism or anything else. Some of those men could never talk to me. I was too strange. I was E.T. I talked to their leaders and helped their leaders. They would just kind of nod. It was mutual respect, but they would never in 10 years say a word to me. And one of those men was named Rock. He was as big as these two doors over here, big as Shaq O'Neal. Okay? Had done 17 years for armed robbery. Rock never talked to me. And one day, he said, "Lady Lawyer," and I turned around and it was Rock. I almost fell over because it had been 11 years. He said, "May I talk to you?" I said, "Rock." He looked at me and he squared himself up and it was clear he had struggled to figure out how to say this to me. He said, "I am not the predator. I am not the predator you met 10 years ago. I have evolved and I am now fit to address you." You never show emotion in front of these men. It was very hard for me not to show my emotion. I said, "Rock, you were always fit to speak to me, but I'm glad I've watched your journey from predator to peacemaker, and I just want to thank you for making it." About 6 months later, the men in American and the men in the Watts gangs that hadn't been murdered or gone to prison on 3 strikes, the ones who were left and who had really gotten out of that life enough to lead a normal life, free of violence, they kept asking me to come to this meeting. It was on a Friday night, and they had a meeting at the Futurama Hotel, some flea bag hotel out at the LAX. I was not happy. They kept calling me. Bo kept calling me. Big Ship kept calling me. You know, Black kept calling me. I said, if you all don't get off my phone, I'm not coming to the meeting. And why do I have to go out? I said, on a Friday night, do you know rush hour traffic? It'll take me 4 hours to get home. I was not happy, but they said, yeah, Lady Laura, you got to come. Lady Laura, you got to come. You come into the meeting. You go. Clearly there was something, but I didn't understand what was going on. Long story short is, I get in my car, slog my way through the 10, you know, try to cut through Slauson and down La Cienega to the La Tierra. You know, I'm cussing the whole way. It's like, what the hell do they want? And I get my brief. I'm at the Futurama Hotel, this ticky-tacky hotel out of what the hell are they doing? I said, what are they doing? I stomp up the stairs. They don't even have an elevator in the place. I stomp up the stairs. And it was doors like that in the back of the room, and the doors flung open. And it was a ballroom full of pink tablecloths with white roses on them. And at the front of the room, there's this big, important-looking dais with white tablecloths and a huge banner hanging over saying, to the women in our lives, thank you for loving us when we didn't deserve to be loved. They did a banquet for their mothers, their sisters, their babies' mamas, their mistresses. Their daughters, their lawyers. In that world, hey, listen, let's just be honest. A natural selection, there ain't no such thing as monogamy for men. Just get used to it, get over it, it is the rule, all right? Just understand that. You recognize, you stop fighting nature, just get over it and understand. Women aren't monogamous either. They're just a little more honest about it than we are. Babies, mamas, the whole mistress, they had everybody sitting at the tables. All of them, wives, mistresses, babies, mamas. It was like a harem, you know, and a lot of cultures have them. As I said, I'm not in the business of judging. I just need to understand the social dynamics that are there. They had their female lawyers there who were considered honorary men in their lives. And for 4 hours, these men got up, went down on their knees and apologized and cried and said, I beat you, I hit you. Some of them even said, I forced you to have sex. These big ex-offender macho men. And they begged for forgiveness. And they said, I will never, ever do that to you again. And you stuck with me through prison. You came back to me. And now I understand I can never do that anymore. Please forgive me. One guy broke it up by saying, baby, you know, I know I've got to learn how to talk. I've got to learn how to express my emotions. But, you know, you were just one more reminder of why I can't be a man. Because I couldn't provide for you. I couldn't support our kids. And every time I looked at you, you just reminded me of how I couldn't be a man. And I lashed out at you. Now I know I can't do that. Now I know that we got to figure it out together. He said, but baby, you know I got to learn to talk about these things and not, as Ms. Rice says, use my brain stem. I got to get up to the upper lobes. He said, but baby, you know, when you want to talk about something, he said, please just don't ask me to talk about it during the football game, you know. I'll talk about it, just not during the Super Bowl. You know, baby, can't you wait till the Super Bowl's over? And the whole place cracked up. But I have to tell you, that dinner that they gave, there wasn't a single woman who suggested it. They had gotten to a point, because we stuck with them, they had gotten to a point, as Rock said, I have evolved. I have evolved. And they said, you loved us when we did not deserve to be loved. That's the cultural fluency that I'm talking about. It's not to excuse the violence. It's to understand that if we don't figure this out, to create a healthy environment for both men and women without men having to feel like we're emasculating them, we will never solve this problem. Ladies, you don't have to live your life like I do. I don't recommend it unless you're genetically predisposed to it. We're about 0.001% of the female population, so men, you can relax. But I think even an ardent feminist needs to understand we're in it together. And this room, if I saw y'all coming at me and I were in that budget committee on City Hall, and you were asking, as much as we love elephants, why is there $40 million for elephants but not for women's shelters? Let's get a legislative agenda and start acting, because let me tell you something. The women in this county and the men in this county increasingly need the resources. We need the human investment, and we don't do it because, ladies and gentlemen, these folks don't count. That's why we left them to a crack war. That's why those women cussed me out as they should have. So I think we got to claim all of our women and all of our men. If you start at the base and you make sure there's a floor, guess what? The rest of us above will be just fine. Thank you for listening. Good luck at your conference. Thank you.